In February of 2026, an explosive rumor completely took over platforms like X and Threads. Millions of users were sharing, commenting, and reacting to a story that seemed pulled straight from a horror movie. The claim was that newly released files from the Department of Justice regarding the Jeffrey Epstein case had exposed comedian and former talk show host Ellen DeGeneres as a prolific cannibal who consumed children. To back up this horrific narrative, the post frequently linked to an audio clip. Listeners could hear a supposed whistleblower giving tearful, terrified testimony of witnessing these extreme acts firsthand. Within days, these posts were being shared and reshared across almost every major platform. The sheer reach of the claim made it feel omnipresent, which allowed a shocking story to bypass the initial filters of many casual scrollers. But if you look at the actual news headlines from that exact same week, Ellen was doing something incredibly mundane. She was chiming in on X to publicly support her former rival, Rosie O'Donnell. Donald Trump had recently threatened to revoke O'Donnell's U.S. citizenship, and Ellen simply posted, "Good for you" at Rosie. That single tweet made headlines because it effectively ended a 20-year grudge. The feud started way back in 2004 when Ellen appeared on Larry King Live and completely denied being friends with Rosie, hurting her feelings and kicking off 2 decades of awkward silence. Look at these two realities side by side. On the internet, Ellen is the mastermind of a global criminal conspiracy. In the real world, she is quietly ending a deeply petty, decades-old TV grudge. How are these parallel realities manufactured? When independent fact-checkers actually investigated the cannibalism rumor, the entire narrative collapsed quickly. They traced the initial posts back to a known fringe misinformation website called The People's Voice. As for that terrifying whistleblower audio, deep fake analysts ran the clip through detection tools. It lacked the natural speech patterns of genuine human testimony because it was entirely generated by artificial intelligence. So, how did the rumor convince so many people? The creators hid their lie behind a massive legitimate data dump. The Department of Justice had just released over 3 million pages of documents related to the Epstein investigation. This creates the perfect environment for a tactic called data proximity. Bad actors use it to weaponize document dumps. They find two unrelated terms deep within a massive dataset and falsely link them to create a shocking narrative. With over 3 million pages to sift through, the release acts as an effective barrier to verification. Few people have the time or tools to download a database this massive just to fact-check a single viral post. But if you do take the time to run a search for Ellen DeGeneres inside the actual Epstein database, you get a very clear picture of how this works. Her name is in there, but it only appears in harmless third-party contexts. One match is literally an Apple News newsletter rounding up the day's events, which happened to quote a speech she gave. Another match is a forwarded email from a Hollywood publicist. The publicist was writing a generic update and simply noted seeing Ellen dancing at a party in St. Bart's. Next, you run a separate search for the words cannibal and ritualistic sacrifice within that exact same database. Those words also appear, but they show up in completely unrelated documents, including random media digests, an academic syllabus, and an email discussing a restaurant that literally had the word cannibal in its name. Simply being named in the same massive government database as a controversial term does not equal criminal involvement. The connection was entirely fabricated. This leaves one final question on the consumer side. Why did the bad actors attach this specific lie to Ellen DeGeneres rather than a generic political figure or policymaker? It comes down to how we perceive information. We struggle to connect with dense policies or abstract ideologies, but we feel immediate familiarity with the entertainers we've watched in our living rooms for decades. Attaching a highly polarizing famous name to a horrific crime guarantees algorithmic engagement. It exploits existing cultural divides and ensures the post will be shared in outrage by detractors and in defense by fans. When we have an emotional link to a famous person, we are more likely to react to news about them with gut instinct rather than logic. For misinformation peddlers, that fascination becomes a highly effective tool for bypassing a viewer's skepticism, which brings us back to the mundane reality of Ellen and Rosie O'Donnell Their 20-year falling out was flawed, it was petty, and it was undeniably human. It is the exact opposite of a sensational internet thriller. The consequence of this dynamic is that it muddies our shared reality. When algorithms push sensational AI-generated noise over mundane truths, it becomes harder for real news to get through the static. This tidal wave of fake conspiracies buries real evidence. It makes it exponentially harder for authorities to investigate genuine leads, protect actual victims, and hold real-world predators accountable. Defending against misinformation requires accepting that famous lives are mostly mundane. We have to maintain our skepticism of the spectacle, verify our sources, and refuse to let our fascination with celebrities be weaponized against the truth. For decades, Ellen DeGeneres sat on a daytime television throne. She commanded the most watched time slot, held Hollywood's biggest stars in the palm of her hand, and built a massive, untouchable billionaire empire on a simple two-word slogan, "Be kind." But today, the woman who ruled American daytime TV is living in permanent exile. She's relocated to a stone house in the English Cotswolds, thousands of miles away from the bright lights of Hollywood and the studios that made her who she was. Getting to the English countryside required a frantic, highly unusual liquidation of her American assets. She took her $96 million California real estate portfolio, specifically her prized beach bungalow in Montecito, and dumped it on the market. When it didn't sell immediately, she slashed the price back down to $29 million, abandoning any attempt to turn a profit. She just needed cash in hand immediately. The cash grab didn't stop at real estate. She initiated a desperate fire sale of her private art collection, moving $10 million worth of pieces. This included original works by Jean-Michel Basquiat, paintings that usually command a premium. Methodical auction process rather than a rushed offloading. She also unloaded several custom sheep sculptures by François-Xavier Lalande, valued at around $1 million each. Selling items of this caliber at this speed is the financial equivalent of ripping out pieces of your soul to guarantee liquidity. When you disappear overnight, you need a cover story. Ellen's camp released a statement blaming the recent U.S. election results for her sudden departure, but a quick look at the timeline exposes the lie. This animated diagram shows that Ellen and her wife, Portia, had actually purchased their new rural English house months before the election even happened. The political narrative is a complete fabrication. You don't secretly liquidate nearly $100 million in assets and manufacture a fake timeline just to enjoy a quiet retirement. These are the mechanical panic steps of someone terrified of an impending threat, desperate to flee before their bank accounts can be frozen. To understand what she's running from, we have to look at the one person who silently held her darkest secrets for 30 years. Rosie O'Donnell watched Ellen transition from a regular comedian into a billionaire who rubbed shoulders with people flying private to secret islands. Rosie kept her mouth shut right up until a 2004 interview on Larry King Live. When Larry asked Ellen what happened to Rosie after her show ended, Ellen coldly responded on national television, "I don't know, Rosie. We're not friends." A 30-year bond was destroyed in a single sentence, and Rosie was finally done being silenced. Before she made her move, Rosie relocated to Ireland. She deliberately positioned herself thousands of miles away, completely outside the jurisdiction and reach of the Hollywood PR machine that normally crushes whistleblowers. Once safely settled, she fired a warning shot. Rosie posted a long statement on Instagram next to a very specific photograph of Jeffrey Epstein. It was a direct signal to the industry that she was ready to talk about the dark network operating on his private island. Rosie's warning materialized rapidly when the newly released Epstein files dropped. Investigators digging through the flight logs, communications, and third-party interviews found Ellen's name indexed right alongside a network of over 300 elite individuals. Those 2020 workplace investigations exposed a rigid system of control, forbidding eye contact and enforcing absolute silence that mirrored the authoritarian structures common in these elite networks. Researchers began comparing the architectural elements of the infamous temple structure on Epstein's island to the design choices Ellen made back in Los Angeles. They compared the specific blue and white striped patterns and geometric arches of the temple to her studio set, highlighting a visual resemblance that many found impossible to ignore, and they didn't stop at set design. During a segment with Sandra Bullock, they actively joked about beauty treatments derived from young human skin cells. They discussed extracting foreskin from foreign babies, openly laughing about a deeply controversial practice on live television. Broadcasting these symbols and discussing these rituals eventually connected to the records found in the Epstein files, creating a trail that she could no longer hide behind the scenes. Insiders suggest Ellen was operating as a connector for this elite network. She would routinely bring vulnerable young talent onto her stage, like a teenage Justin Bieber, and aggressively drill them about their personal trauma. She tested their boundaries on camera, determining who was weak enough to push around and who could be funneled into that darker world. Maintaining that operation came with a severe human cost. Look at Stephen Twitch Boss, the beloved DJ who spent years serving as the energetic heartbeat of her show. When the workplace abuse scandal broke, Ellen reportedly pressured him to go on camera and publicly defend her character. According to those close to him, the immense shame and internal conflict of covering for someone he knew was guilty weighed heavily on his mind, allegedly contributing to his tragic passing in late 2022. Then there is the deeply unsettling case of Anne Heche, Ellen's former partner, who died in a horrific car crash that same year. At the time of her fatal accident, multiple reports surfaced indicating Heche was actively developing and exposing documentary. She was preparing to shed light on her time with Ellen and the terrifying reality of the elite circles she had witnessed firsthand. The sequence of events suggests a recurring pattern. For those in the inner circle, keeping the secrets of a billionaire empire creates a burden that, for some, has proven impossible to survive. Knowing that the Epstein files were public, the Hollywood power structure immediately launched a coordinated minimization strategy. They deliberately flooded the media ecosystem with alternate excuses, attempting to write Ellen off as just one random, unconnected name on a list of hundreds, trying to make anyone asking questions feel like a paranoid conspiracy theorist. But the public isn't buying it anymore. The forced weaponized kindness she performed every afternoon has completely evaporated, leaving only a track record of enabling abusers and destroying the people who trusted her. The contrast is impossible to ignore. Rosie O'Donnell is sitting safely in Ireland, finally free to expose 30 years of lies. Meanwhile, Ellen DeGeneres is hiding out in an English village, universally despised by her new neighbors, completely stripped of her influence. Which brings us back to those empty mansions in Montecito and the missing Basquiat paintings. You have to ask yourself one very simple, logical question. Would an innocent person do this? When innocent people face false allegations, they hire lawyers, they fight back, they demand their day in court to clear their names. They do not liquidate $10 million of fine art in a weekend, dump their historic properties at a massive loss, and flee the United States under the cover of a fake political narrative. We don't need a judge to tell us what happened. The Be Kind brand is reduced to ash. The evidence is written in the desperate actions of a woman who knows her secrets are finally public. The panic itself is the confession.